Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. We're going to talk today about social media, disinformation and living in a post-truth world, and how the tech bros, people like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, David Sachs, and then possibly even Mark Zuckerberg now, Jeff Bezos, you can throw it in there, are looking to influence politics and change public discourse in a way that's incredibly damaging for democracy. And this kind of move of the world towards a far-right populism, and I'm going to define some of these terms because they get bandied around quite a lot. And, you know, why this might be happening and how Russia and China are able to manipulate us, but also social media companies to further their international geopolitical agenda by endorsing and facilitating that move to a far-right populism. And this is very worrying. I mean, we are constantly joining up the dots here at ATP Geopolitics, trying to work out whether there are trends, whether things are happening in the world in a way that is agenda driven, that is going towards a particular end to the benefit of certain people. And I don't want to get all conspiratorial here, but it's kind of like Autocracy Inc., as Anne Applebaum wrote. Fantastic book, you should read it. Talking about how, you know, it's not necessarily that some of these autocratic regimes are getting together in a cabal and organising how things are going to go, but there is this general movement and an interdependency of these rulers and regimes on each other that is, I think, gathering a momentum. We're going to start by looking at something that you might think is completely unconnected to that, but I think it is reflective of a malaise in our public discourse, in our political discourse from the top politicians, and in our social media outlets that allow this information to flourish. And I mean, we already know, you know, statistics, empirical data gives us the knowledge that falsities, disinformation travels 6 times faster than truth on Facebook, for example. The algorithms are set up for division, for hate, for rage, and endorsement of those sentiments, and disinformation fits much better into those characteristics than, you know, boring old truth, right? And we're going to start with the fires in LA at the moment that are raging on. And what's really sad to me is that, you know, if these sort of things happen in the UK, you would hope, or any other country, you would hope that the government and the opposition and opposition parties come together and say, this is really horrendous. Look, you know, our support is with the government in trying to stop these horrific things happening, whether it's a tsunami or a pandemic or a set of wildfires that are out of control. This happened in the pandemic in the UK, which is the government came together, the opposition came together. We're going to support you in trying to sort out this pandemic. This is too serious for us to be politicizing, for weaponizing politically. And Ukraine war, I think, was another example of that, so on and so forth. We've got to this stage in the US, in the political discourse in the US, that is so there's such a corrupted sense of decorum that everything is an opportunity to blame the other side. So there are fires going on, and straight away it's like, this is Gavin Newsom's fault. Well, 90 miles an hour winds. How are you going to put a fire out in those conditions when you can't fly helicopters and fly airplanes? I mean, do you want to go and try and do it? So it's really easy to blame people. And then when you have that, you just set up this us and them. And then you get this scenario whereby no one can ever do anything right. And you've just got 50-50 division, and it's just unassailable. And there's never an opportunity to come together for the greater good. And, you know, here we had an official statement from Donald Trump, just these wildfires ripping into Los Angeles. Donald Trump is attacking Gavin Newsom and blatantly lying, and this is where it gets pertinent to the point of this video, which is lying on social media and disinformation. Lying about there not being water or firefighting planes battling the Eaton fire and the Palisades fire when there are countless videos of firefighters using both water and airplanes to fight the blazes. Shameful man. So Donald Trump says Governor Gavin Newsom, so he's not mature enough to call this person by his name. So at a time of horrendous destruction, he's still trying to jab at the opposition. I think it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. Governor Gavin Newsom refused to sign a water restoration declaration before him that would have allowed millions of gallons of water from excess rain and snowmelt from the north to flow daily into many parts of California, including areas that are currently burning in the virtually apocalyptic way. He wanted to protect an essentially worthless fish called a smelt by giving it less water. It didn't work, but didn't care about the people of California. Now the ultimate price is being paid. I will demand that this incompetent governor allow beautiful, clean, fresh water to flow into California, all caps. He is to blame for this. So Gavin Newsom, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is to blame for all of these wildfires. On top of it all, no water in fire hydrants, not firefighting planes, a true disaster. So then what happened is, while Trump is out here talking about hitting Canada and Mexico with tariffs, they got Canadian air crews doing water drops on LA fires and over 100 Mexican firefighters on the ground helping out like good neighbors. They are for now. Where's the talk about this from Trump? So how do we know Trump is full of it when he shrieks about hydrants running dry? Because in 2016, a horrendous wildfire hit Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Hydrants ran dry and 14 people died, but Tennessee had a GOP governor, so the newly elected Trump posted this: "My thoughts and prayers are with the great people of Tennessee during these terrible wildfires. Stay safe." So the hydrants ran dry there, people died. He goes, "My thoughts and prayers." Happens in California, and he goes, Gavin Newsom, he's to blame for this, yada, yada, yada. That should tell you all you need to know. Gavin Newsom then sort of replied, "Stop encouraging looting by lying and telling people it's decriminalised." So this is Elon Musk getting in and saying looting's been decriminalised, this is terrible, except that was a lie, and then people went out and looted. So Gavin Newsom says, "Stop encouraging looting by lying and telling people it's decriminalised. It's not. It's illegal, as it always has been. Bad actors will be arrested and prosecuted." So you've had people going out and looting. You've also had people going out and setting fires at this time as well, supposedly. So this disinformation is flowing from Elon Musk, from Donald Trump, and from all these people trying to sow division and blame. Ben Mysalis from Midas Touch says the fact that the governor of California is forced to debunk the lies about the LA fire by an account named Hustle Bitch, who has 2.7 million views because it's amplified on this godforsaken algorithm, perfectly encapsulates the chaos wrought by this app. And I talked about this morning with Andrew Perpetua and his Ukrainian updates being throttled by being shadow banned for no particular reason by Twitter, that seems to want to amplify disinformation. Gavin Newsom, then, a lot of misinformation out there, just launched a new site to ensure the public has access to fact-based data around the Southern California wildfires. The truth: California did not cut our firefighting budget. We have nearly doubled the size of our firefighting army and built the world's largest aerial firefighting fleet. California has increased forest management tenfold since we took office, and California will not allow for looting. And then he's set out California fire facts. The fact that you would have to do that is incredibly disturbing. And then you have Fox News, a mainstream media source, jumping in on this too. Alex Cole says, if you are a news organisation and you get community noted for misinformation, your account should get flagged. So Fox News reports Governor Newsom cut the fire budget by $100 million months before lethal California fires. And of course, that's doubling what other people have said, that it was 17, well, not doubling, it was timesing it by 6, which is 17 million was what was previously said by people on social media. And here, readers add context. The 24 to 25 California state budget signed into law by Gavin Newsom in June 2024 reduced funding by 101 million. Despite this, California fire's wildfire protection budget surged from 1.1 billion in 2014 to 3 billion in 2023, most of which was under Newsom's governorship. So then you have, like, if you're talking about that 100 million, you've got to see the larger picture. Then the 17 million claim, is thrown is thrown out by the fact that that 17 million reduction was actually to not renew. Basically, it was buying some kit that would be one-off buying, or you buy every so often. And 17 million was put aside to do that. And then the next year they didn't need that kit. It's not like we're reducing the budget. It's like that was to buy some stuff. We've now bought that stuff. Thank you very much. We've got that stuff. We don't need to buy it this year. And then he actually added 50 million that had to come later in due to the wrangling and whatnot with payments. Actually, it's 50 million partly because the firefighters were getting a pay rise. So they're agreeing that with the unions, and actually 50 million extra came in later. So these sorts of areas of disinformation are really problematic. Here's Pod Save America talking about it.
Our incoming president has responded with half a dozen posts blaming the fires on outgoing President Biden, Governor Newsom, and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. This is how Newsom responded on Wednesday.
People are literally fleeing. People have lost their lives. Kids lost their schools. Families completely torn asunder. Churches burned down. This guy wanted to politicize it. I have a lot of thoughts, and I know what I want to say. I won't. I stood next to a president of the United States of America today, and I was proud to be with Joe Biden. And he had the backs of every single person in this community. He didn't play politics, didn't try to divide any of us.
So just to dig into the specific accusations here, Trump says Biden is leaving him, quote, no money in FEMA because he wasted it all on the, quote, Green New Scam. And he accused Newsom of refusing to sign a water restoration declaration that supposedly would have allowed more water to flow into California from the north because, quote, he wanted, and the reason that Newsom allegedly didn't sign this, what is an imaginary water restoration declaration, is that he, quote, wanted to protect an essentially worthless fish called a smelt. Do you have any idea what Trump was referring to with regard to FEMA or Smeltgate?
I'm embarrassed to say that I do, John.
You do? Okay.
Well, I do. So let's try to fact check these, if you will. Sure. So let's start with FEMA because that's the simpler one. It is true that earlier this year, the disaster relief fund at FEMA, which sends out money in situations like this, was depleted. It was depleted not because of whatever the Green New Scam is. It was depleted because of Hurricane Helene and other natural disasters. However, that fund is not at zero. It is at $27 billion right now because Congress passed and Joe Biden signed a bill in December to do exactly that. Now, it may be that $27 billion is not going to be enough for what we are dealing with in California, but the reason it's at $27 billion and not something more is because Republicans in Congress cut Joe Biden's request. He asked for $40 billion and they cut him down to $27 billion. So the idea that Joe Biden is leaving Trump with a depleted FEMA is just completely factually incorrect. Now on to Smeltgate. What Trump is referring to is the historic debates we have in California about how much water to move from Northern California, where you get water from the Bay, the Delta, the snowmelt from the mountains up near Tahoe, and how much to send primarily to the Central Valley for farmers. If you ever drive from Northern California to Southern California, you will go past the whole part of the country where every farm has a sign yelling at Gavin Newsom asking for more water. The Trump administration and Gavin Newsom had a dispute about how to manage the water. Joe Biden, I think is what triggered Trump. The Biden administration just put in fact a new plan, which deals with one of the issues around this is the smelt, which is a fish, and salmon, which are endangered and threatened species. And so this has been a debate for a long time. Now, what's important about this is it has zero to do with the fires in Southern California. Southern California and LA in particular do not get their water from Northern California. They get it from two aqueducts east of LA. One, the Colorado River one on the Arizona-California border, and the Owens Valley Aqueduct east of LA. California, there have been reports, and this is all sparked by reports, that some fire hydrants were not having water come out of them during the fire. That has nothing to do with a shortage of water in Southern California. The reservoirs in Southern California are at or above their historic levels right now.
Yeah.
The reason why some fire hydrants were not putting water out was the tremendous strain on the system from fighting all of these huge fires at the same time. Like, for example, in the Palisades fire, prior to the fire, there were 3 1 million gallon tanks of water that were positioned for this. Which should have taken care of any normal fire. They needed 3 times that to get there. And so they could not refill the tanks fast enough to meet the need. And that's a problem. So there's a larger question about updates to the system, updates in the infrastructure to make it more prepared for these sorts of things. But it has absolutely zero to do with where Gavin Newsom is sending water in California.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's
and they go on to fact check. So look, this is not that we can't criticize and ask questions where this is needed, and were we prepared enough, and what else needs to happen in order for this to happen, not to happen again. And you can talk about climate change and long-term action, and short-term things as well, and the idea that and they go on to talk about how the winds were absolutely ferocious. I mean, you should see some of the footage. There's no way you can put a fire out like that with hoses. I mean, those are blowing embers all over the shop, and then you got people starting fires as well, and etc. etc. These Santa Ana winds and whatnot, and they're looking to get worse as well come Wednesday as well, so it could flare up again. But anyway, I digress. The idea here is that, you know, you can fact check all these claims, and they are demonstrably false from the incoming president and Elon Musk and all these people that control kind of these media sources, and they get amplified more than the truth gets amplified, and that is a real challenge for us all the time. You can talk about it in the context of Ukraine war, any kind of pandemic, geopolitics, whatever. It's a real challenge. You know, if the planes can't get up in the air and the helicopters can't get up, they can't pick up water, so they can't drop it, and you're fighting that fire, those huge fires, just with people on the ground, and you're not going to win that. And yeah, hydrants were empty because they've been absolutely shellacked, and so on and so forth. But of course, you know, people love to get angry. Fear sells, and algorithms, unfortunately, play into this, and they help to spread disinformation, and you're constantly trying to fight that. Now, it's really interesting to see Joe Rogan. Listen to Joe Rogan for once, says Ed Krasenstein. Here is Joe Rogan this past July foreshadowing the California fires. He says that the fire is going to hit and there will be nothing anyone can do. Let's listen to him say this.
This is one of the reasons that freaked me out. And he was telling me, he goes, dude, one day, he goes, it's just going to be the right wind, and fire is going to start in the right place, and it's going to burn through LA all the way to the ocean, and there's not a fucking thing we can do about it. I go, really? He goes, yeah, we just get lucky. He goes, we get lucky with the wind. He goes, but if the wind hits the wrong way, it's just going to burn straight through LA, and there's not going to...
That's a firefighter saying that to Joe Rogan.
...be a thing we could do about it. Because these fires are so big, dude. When they're talking about like thousands of acres that are burning simultaneously with like 40-mile-an-hour winds. And the winds just...
And the 40-mile-an-hour winds, which is what they're expecting on Wednesday, are going to be bad enough. These were 84-mile-an-hour winds, I think they were. Insane.
Blowing embers through the air, and those embers are landing on roofs, and those houses are going up, and they're landing on bushes, and those bushes are going up, and everything's dry. And once it happens in a way where it's so spread out that there's nothing they can do. There's nothing they can do.
You just have to evacuate, right?
Nothing they can do. Once.
And there you go. Joe Rogan has told you, because a firefighter has told him, that's what's going to happen one day, and that's what just happened. When you haven't had rain in that particular area, any serious rain since March, and we're now in almost the next March, and you've got problems. But because we love to blame people, it's just an opportunity to attack. And it's, you know, controlling these narratives. I talked to you the other day about Joe Biden having lower approval ratings now than Donald Trump, after Donald Trump and the January 6th insurrection debacle. And yet Biden's got lower approval ratings now, and yet he's handing over like one of the best economies in certainly in the G7, G20 at the moment. He's done an incredible job, and some people are going to spit at the scream that, but he really has done, empirically so, an incredible job with the economy.
Let me close where I started. With this morning's jobs report, more than 250,000 jobs in December. In 4 years, the economy created 16.6 million new jobs, the most in any single presidential term. We've created jobs every single month I was in office. During my presidency, we saw the lowest average unemployment rate of any administration in the last 50 years. And battling through the worldwide effects of the pandemic, Putin's war in Ukraine, and supply chain disruption, inflation rate is down to nearly 2%. These are simple, well-established economic benchmarks that measure the strength of any economy, the success of failure of any president's 4 years in office. I believe the economy I'm leaving is the best in the world and stronger than ever for all Americans. So I think that's what we have. We'll see what the next president does.
And yet, those are the stats. You know, with today's job reports being released, President Biden will officially have gone his entire term without a negative jobs month. That is unprecedented. There's no other president that's ever done that. When you look at economy and this idea, this prevailing trope that Republicans are the best for the economy. When you look at the data, here's from Axios. Republicans crash the economy, Democrats take over and fix it, but they get blamed for the conditions Republican left them, so people elect Republicans who get credit for the repairs made by Democrats. And this is about to happen again. So you end up doing an amazing job restoring the economy to what it should be. And then, in this case, Trump will take over and go, look at how amazing the economy is. And then he'll trash it, which is what happened last time, which is what happened the time before. And then, yes, okay, you can talk pandemic, you can talk global economic recessions and whatnot. But, you know, you look statistically over time, you look at the jobs growth. What was it that out of 51 million, the Republicans have only added 1 million jobs in net or something over however many cycles. And same can be said about national debt and deficit. And anyway, point is that we have these prevailing ideas that are distant from reality. So our perceptions are they are a result of being manipulated by those who are controlling the media. So who controls the media? Well, in the mainstream, I was speaking, in fact, and this is where I'm going to be a little, I guess, partisan. But I was speaking recently about how no, it wasn't here. It's going to be around here. One of these ones. Yes, here it is. So I was speaking recently about how in the UK, we don't really have a media landscape that supports like the centre left. And arguably many places around. So when you go to the US, you've got the corporate left, which I think is centrism, is supported by MSNBC, CNN, and whatnot. And then you've got the right, Fox News, and then in America, you've got the talk radio stations are all conservative, right-leaning. You've got the tech bros, you've got social media companies. That's what we're going to spend the next part of this talk on. And all of these components support, unfortunately, the right wing and the centre-left. In the UK, you've got the Guardian, and you possibly can't, from a more working-class point of view, you've got the Mirror, and then that's it. Really, and then you have to go to places like Novara Media, like you would go in the US to maybe TYT, Young Turks, or similar, to get a progressive voice. But the thing with those progressive voices on the further to the left is that they attack the centre left. So you'll have Novara Media will spend as much time attacking Labour in the UK as the right wing attacked Labour. And so the centre left gets absolutely hammered by the far left and by everyone else in a way that the right doesn't, because the right controls mainstream media in the UK. So print media, there's something like 9 newspapers against 2. And you look at the readership, there's a vast difference. And so they control the narrative, they control the mechanisms of messaging, and that means that the left is always up against it. I think, well, certainly in the UK, I've written I wrote a 3-piece series of articles on this some years ago, and looked at how first past the post and the media landscape and all these different things like really favour the right to continue staying in power. Someone says, Pedro Reis says, here in Portugal we have the same problem. The centre left has no voice, mainly in political commentary. It has to do with the interests of economic groups in the media. So the thing is, if you're a moneyed corporation, right, you are generally going to be against what the left is going to do, which is to try and regulate and try and sort out more equity or at least equality of opportunity for the country. And actually, that doesn't always, or at least they don't seem to think it's in the best interests of those of the moneyed elites who want to cut taxes so they can make more profit and make more money personally as CEOs, etc., and just be able to do what they like so they can make more money. It's about going for that profit, and so they see the left as in the way and the right as stripping regulation. And so therefore, if these big moneyed interests are always going to be, broadly speaking, against the left, then and they also control the media because they are media companies, then the left is always going to really, really struggle. And this is what we are seeing. So there's an interesting view there. So anyway, let's go back. We're going to go into social media now. And we're going to, first of all, I just want to talk about some terms here. So here's a paper in a journal, International Sociological Association, International Sociology Journal, the rise of the populist radical right parties in Europe, and talking about how this is happening, all the evidence for the rise of the right and what the reasons might be. One of the main reasons, it says, for the rise of the radical right movements and parties in Europe is the public's frustration with mainstream political parties. So that would be centre-left, centrist and centre-right. So you kind of establishment parties. Responses to economic, social, political and security problems, which are genuine worries and frustrations, right? You haven't sorted this out. This hasn't happened. Why is this the case? This is so unfair. And then you go, right, I'm fed up with that. I'm going to vote for these guys. But the problem is these guys, whether it be the radical right or the radical left, often are presenting very simplistic answers for very complex problems, and those simplistic answers are not good enough, and they will not solve those problems. So they're kind of promising the moon on a stick without any realistic way of delivering that, and they are gaining in popularity partly because they are able to both promise the world but deliver very little, but also manipulate social media really well. And we'll come to that in a second. So in addition to economic crises, the influx of immigrants and refugees has exacerbated unemployment concerns, with populist radical right parties claiming only they could solve these problems, which is something, obviously, immigration is very much in the wheelhouse of the populist right. And I'm not saying there aren't immigration problems, by the way, and I'm not saying there aren't challenges with huge amounts of refugees in going into certain countries, etc., right? These are hugely problematic. They're huge challenges for any society. But what are the answers to that, and are those answers realistic? So, for example, you could look to the US and say the populist right says, right, we need to get rid of 15 million immigrants, and then we need to change the legal status of some of these so they then become illegal, and then we get rid of them as well. Which sounds like a really, if you're into that, then that's a really nice, simple solution. You'll promise the moon on a stick, yeah. But actually, how do you round up those people? What happens when they're married and have families and they're set up? How does that work in terms of those roles that they are playing in society and also in the economy? So it's just absolutely crazy. So then you're going to have the practicalities of having camps, like concentration camps of immigrants, and then you literally got to throw them out the country. Where are you going to send them to? How much is this going to cost? And then what are the inflation implications? Taking them out of the workforce then means you've got a labour shortage. Who's going to be doing all those low-skilled jobs, which is the reason why many of these people are coming to the country? And indeed, it's part of the economic strategy, if you like, is inbuilt, is baked into the system in the US. So you're just going to be taking in these immigrants to do those jobs. So yeah, on the one hand, you've got a simple solution: get rid of all the immigrants. On the other hand, that's wrought with complexity. My point here is, I'm not trying to make a value judgment on immigration or not. and my point is that simple solutions are often not good enough for very complex problems. And it's very easy to say, we're going to do this. And then because you're unlikely to ever actually get into power, what that does is you just promise a world and you don't have to deliver that. And you go, and then you can criticize a government who couldn't deal with that very complex problem. You say, well, we would have sorted it out because we would have done this. But then when you actually do get in, like MAGA has got in, Trump has got into the US, he's in a situation like, well, he promised to get rid of all those immigrants, and now people are expecting them to do that. Oh dear. So you might have this sudden realization that those simplistic solutions might be unsuitable they might solve that problem, but they'll create like 20 more problems that are actually far worse. And it's going to be interesting to see how the next 4 years goes. Okay, so furthermore, this paper says, populist radical right parties using eclectic methods to simplify complex problems, this is the key, have masked the multifaceted nature of these issues, suggesting that democratic debate and compromise are unnecessary. By downplaying social differences and polarizing society into us versus them, these parties weaken democracy and encourage authoritarian governance. So the populist right is likely to, and left, but it's just there isn't much of the populist left compared to the populist right at the moment. The populist right is much more likely to tend towards authoritarianism. They present a binary narrative of the pure people versus the corrupt elite, undermining democratic systems and eroding the rule of law by portraying legislative and judicial bodies as obstacles to the expression of popular sovereignty. These parties champion the supremacy of the executive, thereby weakening the principle of separation of powers. So it's like, want to tear stuff down, the people rising up, that's that kind of populist element of people rising up, tear down all these institutions, and then there are no checks and balances in for who's at the top. So and then you have an authoritarian regime with no checks and balances. Now, it doesn't always happen really quickly, and we're going to look at that in a second, sometime, or actually towards the end. Sometimes this happens very slowly. We're going to look at it at the beginning. But let's just work out what populism is a little more. So there are three core ideological features, says this paper: nativism, authoritarianism, and populism. Those are the features for the populist radical right parties. Nativism refers to the belief that the state should be governed solely by members of the native group, so get rid of immigrants type thing, and that non-natives pose a fundamental threat to the homogeneity of the nation state. This has been interpreted, we've got Newth, who's an academic, interprets nativism as a racist and xenophobic discourse centered around an exclusive vision of the nation. The author confirms that the discourse constructs the non-native foreigner or even non-integrated fellow citizen in opposition to the native people along antagonistic and horizontal lines. This discourse operates on a racist logic of us versus them, portraying immigration as a threat to the nation and emphasizing the need to halt the perceived danger of invasion. Here, the us is positioned as civilized while the others are deemed barbaric. So that's your classic nativist that you see in a lot of the like AFD, FPO in Europe, the Rassemblement National. So these, I'm not talking about, say, the Conservatives in the UK, although I think the Conservatives in the UK have started to embrace right-wing populism. Kemi Badenoch, the new leader, and Robert Jenrick, the one that the two were fighting to be leader, and they were both trying to get leader by being the most right-wing populist, right? So I think there's a move in the UK, like we've seen in the US, where the Republican Party has been overtaken by a right-wing populist ideology, which does have indisputably elements of this, which is why they want to get rid of 15 million immigrants, etc., etc. Okay, populism is not to say there aren't problems with immigration and social cohesion, etc., etc. Populism as a strategy to mobilize citizens comes into play by dividing society and fostering antagonism. This conceptual ambiguity surrounding populism in contemporary usage has led to an increase in scholarly research on the term. Despite this, one study of populist radical right parties and Muda, his definition of populism remained widely cited and supported in the literature. According to Muda, populism can be understood as a thin-centred ideology that divides society into two antagonistic groups. However, within populism is indeed an ideology is still a matter of debate. Populism frames society as divided into two homogenous and opposing camps, the pure people and a corrupt elite. So there's often like the elites at the top, the establishment, and that's what you hear with kind of MAGA. We want to drain the swamp. We want to get rid of the deep state. You often hear the deep state as this kind of quasi conspiratorial entity that doesn't, I mean, in reality, doesn't really exist like people imagine it does. It argues that politics should express the general will of the people, which often leads to a rejection of pluralism. This is what we all want. We don't want this. We want that, and and you're whipping up the populace to, and I think you're able to manipulate them using techniques like fear and harnessing social media to sell fear. Leclerc defines populism as a political strategy that divides society into two antagonistic groups, the pure people and the corrupt elites. Populism, in this sense, centres on the unfulfilled demands of the people and acts as a mode of politics that seeks to prioritise the interests of the public. From this perspective, populist politics reveals the fragmented nature of society and draws out the antagonistic dimension of conflict, positioning the demands of the people against the elites through a discursive strategy. For this reason, Leclerc emphasises that populism lacks ideological coherence. And actually, sometimes, you'll get like real left-wing economic populism or economic policies in this kind of populism. Is it interesting that Nigel Farage's Reform Party, for their last the last election, they actually took on loads of left-wing economic ideas and drew that together with loads of right-wing ideological sort of us versus them immigration ideas, and then fuse these together. It's not always coherent, or at least it's not always seen as the kind of left wing or right wing. Populism can go, and I think Brexit really harnessed this, which is where a lot of left wing working class people in the UK from areas of the north or all around the UK really harnessed the Brexit spirit, and as a result, Reform have now realised, in order to keep those people, we need to appeal to them kind of with those left-wing bit of, regulation to protect them and, workers' rights or this or that or whatever it may be, welfare or NHS. We need to keep them on board rather than just going full right-wing, not only in terms of, things like immigration, but also maybe economic liberalism and completely stripping out the government and lack of regulation. Actually, some of these people over here won't want that. And so Reform have had to adapt. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Trump in America, because you've got things like Medicare, Medicaid, where a lot of working class people, they rely on that. How is Trump going to deal with that if he wants to keep popular with the populace, right? And to keep that populism going. Anyway, Muller adds that populism is not just an anti-elite but also anti-pluralist movement. Populist leaders claim to represent the real people and label their opponents as illegitimate or traitorous. These definitions highlight populism's tendency to challenge established democratic norms and institutions. Populists often attempt to bypass institutional checks and balances in the name of representing the will of the people. So this is about populists breaking the rules, and we're going to have a look at that with the tech bros in a second. This is where authoritarianism presents significant opportunities. Authoritarianism typically reflects a preference for order and authority, often upheld by a strong leader and centralized control, but populism undermines liberal democratic norms and fuels authoritarian tendencies. For instance, Munk 2018 warns that populists, upon gaining power, often dismantle democratic institutions and establish authoritarian governance structures that prioritize the leader's agenda over the rule of law, which is what happened in Hungary. So, and we're going to have a little look at that in a second. So that's what I called the other day the urbanization of, I think, society, where you chip away at the judiciary, and we've seen this. Like MAGA's done this in the US. The Supreme Court, although it's not quite going Trump's way, because actually Amy Coney Barrett is turning out to be quite an interesting Trump appointee, because she's a couple of times voted against Trump, but on paper there's a 6-3 majority where Trump has put in 4 is it now Supreme Court justices, that they should be in his pocket. Then he's trying to regulate the media, trying to shut down the media. Has Musk in control. He's got Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos. You got the OpenAI guy. You've got all these media. Tim Cook from Apple going to Trump and genuflecting, starting to control the media. Then you start to see this slow but assured degradation of the checks and balances for an authoritarian leader, or for any leader. The judiciary and the media are the two main forms of holding leaders to account, and they appear to be being basically worn away. I've just moved this next part next because I think actually it goes more perfectly onto what I was just saying. This is Chris Murphy speaking. So he's an American Democratic lawmaker speaking to Pod Save America podcast here on exactly this topic.
And listen, this is how democracies fall. There are very few instances where a healthy democracy collapses where there is a before and after moment, right? The Parliament building doesn't burn down in every dissent. What's going to happen here is that just enough of the political opposition either goes to jail or gets threatened with imprisonment that a lot of regular, ordinary Americans just decide to not show up to the protests, to just...
And he's talking about people like Kash Patel taking over the FBI. Then you got an Attorney General, Pam Bondi, people who are real. It's not that they'll pay lip service, but they are absolutely loyal to the agenda of Trump and will do anything for Trump. And then if that ends up with naysayers going to prison or being threatened with prison, then you are, and if not enough people protest about that, then you start seeing the country democratically backslide.
Stay home to put their energies somewhere else. That the press feels sort of just fragile enough, feels the threat of having their license pulled just serious enough that they shave the edges off the way that they cover the president. And
we're going to go to Ian Hislop, who's the editor of the Private Eye, a satirical magazine in the UK, in a second. And he talks about how Washington Post just did that, just stopped some cartoons from being published because it would have upset the tech bros too much. It would have upset Trump too much. And that's happening, shaving the edges off.
And if that's the case, then you won't really notice the moment in which the opposition has become so weak that they can't win another election. That's what happened in Hungary. That's what's happened in Turkey. That's what's happened in Serbia. They still have elections. There's still an opposition that sort of has the trappings of being real. But the regime always keeps them weak enough that they can never win. And so Republicans will be able to say, well, no, I still see a Democratic Party. I still see op-eds criticizing Donald Trump. This is a healthy democracy, but it's just unhealthy enough that the Trump family never, ever loses power. And I think that's really hard for Americans to believe because that just, that we've gone 240 years with two healthy parties. But the playbook is out there for Trump to follow. It's been used a dozen times in other countries and other democracies that are no longer healthy democracies. And that's what I worry about, that Republicans will just be able to look themselves in the mirror and say, the Democratic Party's still there, everything's okay, but that the thing is permanently rigged in their favor.
So I want to talk about the rigging, and then I want to talk about how to unrig it. Huck reported this week that Amazon will be paying $40 million for the privilege of airing a documentary about Melania Trump, executive produced by Melania Trump. Disney and Paramount apparently also bidders. Mark Zuckerberg announced this week that Facebook will no longer be doing any fact-checking, which is just a capitulation to Donald Trump. Tim Cook of Apple donated $1 million personally to Trump's inauguration. Are you at all surprised? I'm surprised by how quickly and with such alacrity these people have bent the knee.
I mean, I am surprised. But I mean, listen, we're going on 30 years of greed having become an American virtue, in which there is really no shame involved in ordering your life in a way that just prioritizes getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier. And so these guys get away with it because people, kind of understand that as long as it's a means towards enrichment, you are fulfilling an American value. But it is extraordinary what everybody from Apple to Amazon to Facebook to Comcast to ABC News has done to signal to Trump that we are not going to give you trouble. And it's because these billionaires and these companies have become so massive and so diversified that government policy really matters to them in terms of what their returns are, in terms of how much money their shareholders make, and in terms of how much money the CEOs take home. And broadly,
in other words, there's quid pro quo. Government policies really matter. Regulation really matters. Investigations really matter. So in order to appeal to our shareholders or for us to have more money and more power, we need to be working with the government. We need to be in a pocket, or the government needs to be in our pocket, in terms of, like, if we're giving money, then we expect stuff back. $40 million from Jeff Bezos for Amazon's rights to show that Melania Trump documentary is a way of Jeff Bezos giving Trump $40 million so that contracts come his way, or so that regulations don't come his way.
It sort of feels like the country is giving these billionaires a pass because we've just valued enrichment ahead of the common good or ahead of protecting democracy. And that's super sad. That's a relatively new sort of value alignment in this country, new to the last 40 years, but it's part of what will sort of sing the song of democracy's downfall.
Yeah,
absolutely. On point there. And here we have Ian Hislop from Private Eye really, I think show Musk for what he is and talk about this idea as well.
I mean, it's almost impossible to avoid him, and he has enormous power because of his money, and B, his reach to people who have been persuaded over the last 5 years or so that the mainstream media hasn't covered any stories, and that the only people who've noticed anything happening in the world are people sitting in their bedrooms sending messages to each other. It's an amazing feat of deception. And I think we should have got on to him early on when he quite gratuitously called someone who was trying to help those boys in Thailand a paedophile. An American court let him off, the pedo guy. I think he thought from then on, I can say anything I like. It doesn't have to be true. It's better if it's not true, and no one will stop me. And that's what's happened.
We've seen lots and lots of powerful media figures over the decades and centuries, probably the Rothermeres and the Murdochs and so forth. But we have never had somebody like this who is tweeting, speaking in his own name several times a day, many times a night.
No, I mean, and it's not merely that he's a sort of a classic social media adolescent who hasn't grown up. I mean, the temper tantrums, the lack of responsibility. Yeah, I mean, the whole business was set up by a group of ungrown-up men who are now running companies in their own image. And to see them now sucking up to Trump when they were quite happy not to suck up to him before, purely on the grounds that this is to their commercial advantage. They have no morality at all, literally none.
And if we were having this conversation 48 hours ago, we would have said, well, in the end, it's only one organisation, it's only one part of social media, it's only X. But since then, Zuckerberg, who has Facebook and Instagram and Threads, has come and done exactly the same thing, saying he is going to mimic Musk, in effect.
Yes, and I mean the idea that you have this vastly powerful organisation, and about 5 minutes ago it was very important for you to have moderators and fact checkers, and now because you want to suck up to Trump, you don't, is appalling. And Bezos is exactly the same. His newspaper in the States has just pulled a cartoon, you can see where I'm coming from here, in which all the tech bros are seen worshipping at the shrine of Trump. And then the newspaper, oh, no, we can't publish this. It's repetitive, it's boring, we don't want to publish this. I mean, who do they think they're kidding? Yeah. We're in a sort of an era of total fatuity.
Total fatuity. And as...
absolutely fascinating. And Ian Hislop knows what he's talking about, because he, as editor of Private Eye, a satirical magazine, has been taken to court a number of times for publishing stuff. Right? He's not often in court. Like, if you want to see a free speech advocate, don't go to Elon Musk. Go to someone like Ian Hislop, who is arguably infinitely cleverer, more intelligent, more knowledgeable, and just also funnier than Elon Musk will ever be. Anyway, I digress. So there was reference there to like the tech bros and these people who are running these companies a bit like children. Hislop was saying. Now, the tech bros in American politics, there's an interesting relationship there. So the tech industry with these people like Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Elon Musk, they have, Peter Thiel took on JD Vance, put JD Vance through, I think employed him in his hedge fund and got him, basically funded him to be the senator of Ohio. That was Peter Thiel that did that, and that is his protege. He is training him up to be the vice president who does whatever Peter Thiel wants him to do. And then you put this together with cryptocurrency, which these guys have fingers in a lot of pies concerning that, and whether that's going to be playing a major thing in the upcoming administration. Driving force behind this phenomenon. So the motivations behind this surge in political spending remain complex. Evidently, a key concern for the crypto industry is regulation. Conversely, the SEC's chair, Gary Gensler, advocates for treating crypto assets like securities, potentially jeopardizing their value. Furthermore, the proliferation of stable coins further complicates the situation. These tokens, pegged to traditional currencies, resemble conventional banking practices, thereby raising questions about regulatory oversight. Ultimately, financial self-interest likely fuels this significant investment in political campaigns. So these guys have funded Trump into the presidency and will be absolutely onto him for deregulating the social media domains, but also importantly cryptocurrency and any other tech domains that that they are involved in. It is absolutely it's really problematic. So lots to say about these tech bros. I'm actually going to go next to Pod Save America again, but the offline part of this, where they're talking about tech bros and something called techno-authoritarianism or techno-fascism. Now, techno-authoritarianism can be seen in different ways. So they're going to talk about these kind of tech bros doing things to do with actual democracy, but it can also be seen in terms of like China and the ability they have to monitor their entire population in an authoritarian manner with technology, right? And always knowing what they're all doing, and whether that be cameras and CCTV or just being able to hack in or know, or etc., etc. So that's one type of techno-authoritarianism. This is a different type.
Donald Trump's selection of J.D. Vance as his running mate. As a reminder, J.D. Vance, while writing Hillbilly Elegy, was employed as he was a venture capitalist in the Valley and was working with Peter Thiel, who's also like funded a large portion of his Senate campaign in 2022. As someone who has literally written a book about Silicon Valley's relationship to democracy, what do you make of all this?
Okay, so I know sometimes you hear the phrase techno-authoritarianism or techno-fascism, and those sound like kind of euphemism or epithets for like guys in Silicon Valley whose views we don't like, but it is a literal accurate descriptor of a like very small subset of people, but very influential subset of people in Silicon Valley, like Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz, who are like the big money guys who fund these startups that then become the big companies. Like Peter Thiel gave the first big investment that gave rise to Facebook. He did the same in Airbnb, Lyft, Spotify. We wouldn't have these companies without him. So it's very, very influential, very powerful. And Peter Thiel literally and explicitly has said that we should do away with democracy, that we should abolish people's right to participate in elections and replace it with rule by literally tech industry companies and by tech elites, because their wealth proves that they are superior, they're better than the rest of us, so they should be in charge. And he, like, J.D. Vance is, like, really their guy. Like, they plucked him out of obscurity at Yale Law School. They took him to the Valley. They got him all of this money. They funded him, like, right into the Ohio Senate seat. And this is not to say that J.D. Vance represents, like, a Trojan horse for a, like, specific secret shadow plot. Like, these guys are not that smart.
Right.
There's not, like, a secret plot to install Facebook as, like, our Roman god emperor. But it is to say that this is a new and pretty powerful and very moneyed faction as part of the like Trump explicitly authoritarian, like let's tear down democracy mission, which is I think noteworthy.
And you don't have to.
So talking about the urbanization of the democracy, the government, where you're influencing the judiciary, where you're influencing the press. This is part of that. This is tearing down the pillars of communication, and it's incredibly worrying.
Like necessarily believe in conspiracies, that there's some like larger conspiracy here. It makes sense in a way, because what is democracy? Democracy is messy and fractious and requires you to like work and talk and disagree with a whole bunch of people in like productive ways. And these tech guys who have a lot of money, these billionaires, and like they're used to just being like, oh, I had a great idea. Now or I like, threw a couple $100 million into this idea, and now it's a big deal. And so I don't want anyone challenging me.
Right.
I don't want to have to deal with a whole bunch of other people. Things should run much easier if I'm the only one in charge.
And
that's really how they think.
Yes, it is. And there's been a very specific and very extreme radicalization of, again, we're talking about a very small number of individuals. I don't want to tar all of Silicon Valley with this.
No.
But these guys who like very publicly took this turn starting in like 2019, 2020. And as the reaction to, it started with critical media coverage of social media companies and tech companies, which they considered illegitimate. And they started arguing we need to abolish the press because it is cutting against human enterprise. And the way they've gotten to this.
So now, do you understand? Elon Musk always talking down the press. He's consistently saying Twitter is the number one source of news in the world, even though actually people going on Twitter to look at the mainstream media press often, obviously not all the time, but Musk is absolutely hell-bent on denigrating mainstream media, and this fits into this kind of techno-fascism.
Is they have persuaded themselves that the future of the human race will be determined by Silicon Valley because they are the ones creating the new world for us. So anyone who is an impediment to that, for example, if your reporter writes a critical article about Facebook, that means that you are literally standing in the way of the human race and its future.
It's also like
and these guys are called, futurists as well, and all sorts. I mean, fascinating stuff. Here's an article in Atlantic Silicon Valley got their guy. JD Vance has solidified tech's MAGA moment. Plenty of articles talking in similar ways. If we go back to that piece I was just telling you, Tech Bros in American Politics, and then there's a little bit in here about rules indeed. Control F. And we'll find that. So, beyond financial interest. Furthermore, this alignment might extend beyond financial gain. Tech entrepreneurs often feel that the traditional political process doesn't adequately address their concerns or needs. Correspondingly, this sense of alienation could create a sense of common cause with unconventional or populist candidates, and therefore drive them to take a more direct role in shaping policy. Subsequently, the belief that the rules are rigged might inspire a desire to bypass established systems, an attitude perhaps mirrored by political leaders who feel the same. So it's the idea that these populist leaders like Trump and populist or tech bro people think they can break the rules. We need to just bypass the rules. I'm going to do this. I don't need. So Trump was recently saying, I don't need Congress to do that. I can do it myself, blah, blah, blah. And it's this idea that you can just bend the rules to get what you want. Again, talked about here in another interview to do with Peter Thiel and JD Vance.
Yeah, 0 to 1 is one of those books that at the time was greeted as this like brilliant business book. And I went to work at one point at a media startup and we were all told that this was one of like 2 or 3 books that we had to read to understand startup culture. But if you go back and read it now, understanding, or at least understanding Peter Thiel and who he is better, there's some scary stuff in there. And it's also just like an incredibly important book for understanding what tech and Silicon Valley was going to become, because of course what the title refers to, 0 to 1, is that the thing that he's saying you should do as a tech startup founder is that you should go to some market that doesn't exist, and that you should go from, it's 0 because there is no service that lets you order taxis on your phone, and then you're the first person who invents that and you control 100% of the market. It's overtly a pro-monopoly book, which certainly puts him at odds with our girl Lena Khan.
Well, it's also, to me, like the central point of 0 to 1 and kind of like probably the most important part of Peter Thiel's ideology and a lot of the ideology of Silicon Valley over the last couple of decades is that people who succeed do so because they break the rules, because they do not follow the consensus viewpoint. And whether that consensus viewpoint is unspoken, just a cultural norm that you're breaking, or whether it is an explicit law, like you cannot operate a car service, an unlicensed car service in our city. And his idea is, it's not just that that it's acceptable if a startup maybe doesn't follow all the rules. I think most people kind of believe that like small companies, you're talking about like a 3-person business, like they're not going to be as good at compliance as like a gigantic corporate law firm. That's, I think, somewhere close to conventional wisdom. Thiel's arguing, though, that it's a moral imperative, that like you should break the rules, that society, that if we just listened to what we as a society have agreed on, then that is a bad thing. We will get stagnation, and he thinks stagnation is the worst possible thing. And you can understand why that is like an interesting, provocative idea, but it also is incredibly anti-democratic. Like a lot of these rules, like some rules are good and some rules are bad, but like a lot of rules are rules because the majority of people agreed on them. And because after much consideration or whatever, we've decided that, like, you know, we want people who are driving around in cars in our cities to have some oversight or whatever it is. And just sort of unilaterally saying like, all of this is bad has a lot of implication. I think it helps explain like a lot of the ways in which Silicon Valley sort of, you know, at least from a critic's point of view, got out of control during the 2010s.
And yeah, so moving on from that, we then have this a predilection for at least Musk to then start getting directly involved in say the democracies of other countries. So Germany, the UK, obviously, you know, the US. You could say making claims about Canada and Denmark and Greenland and Mexico and so on and so forth. He got involved with this whole grooming gang scandal in the UK, like 10 years too late, but and then, you know, advocated for Reform UK as a populist party to be the solution for the UK. But then, because Nigel Farage wasn't quite as hardcore enough for him, he then called for Nigel Farage he wasn't good enough to be the leader. Now we've just heard that 24% of all of Reform UK's councillors have, yesterday evening I think it was, notified they'll be resigning from the party because, and I quote, "We believe the current party management is either incompetent or malevolent and have just lost all confidence. And we have lost all confidence in the leadership and its structures." Funny how that happens when you throw your lot in with a party that doesn't have members so much as subscribers and no real democratic accountability for its leadership. Will it be Rupert Lowe or versus Nigel Farage showdown to see who can outbigot the other one? Well, says Barely Politics. Now, what's interesting here is that this is a direct result of Elon Musk. Elon Musk has brought this about. He has not only just interviewed Alice Weidel, but also advocated for reform, and then has created a schism even in reform. He's talked to Alice Weidel, he's interviewed her, no one else, only the right-wing populist in Germany. This is all very, very worrying, where you have people getting involved in politics in countries they don't know enough about, saying things they don't really understand. I mean, you know, agreeing that Hitler is was a communist is just ridiculous. Quite a lot of odd things in this in that interview, from what I can gather. I haven't listened to it myself. I don't really want to. And then he was saying, well, look, you know, she can't be far right, Alice Weidel, because she's a lesbian and she's married to someone from Sri Lanka, right? So, you know, therefore, it can't be is clearly not far right. But she is seen as actually as a moderate, one of the more moderate voices in AfD in Germany. But again, you know, this is just playing around with irresponsibly, I think, with ideas here. Elon Musk is just saying, oh, look, and I talked about this as a fallacy of hasty generalization, where you go, oh, you know, you got the Mongol horde riding over to you. You're like, oh, Dave on the left there, he's lovely. Dave Mongol, he's one of my, he's a really nice guy, Dave Mongol. So these guys are going to be all right. Oh dear, I'm dead. Because I just thought Dave Mongol represented all of the Mongol horde. And this is mentioned here by a German a German journalist based in the UK.
Government, because the other parties just cannot find enough common ground anymore to form coalitions against them. So I wouldn't say never, but what I would say, and what I have also said in various of my columns and pieces, is that Alice Weidel doesn't necessarily represent the entire AfD, as you've just alluded to as well. She's a very sort of interesting character, really, but doesn't, because she's female, she's openly gay, as you say, she lives in a relationship with her Sri Lankan partner. She represents the comparatively moderate end of the AfD, and there is a hardcore wing under the Thuringian politician Björn Höcke as well. And they're actually having a party conference this weekend where they're still arguing whether to use kind of far-right slogans like remigration in their party manifesto, which Alice Weidel was careful to avoid. But there's this wing within our party that wants that back in, basically, and wants a much more radical pro.
So, don't think that Alice Weidel is AfD, but Elon Musk has done that. He's now advocating for AfD, and it's all highly controversial. Now, WP here says, Jesus, Jonathan, all the things you're highlighting fit into a pattern, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. Greenland, Canada, Hungary, Slovakia, UK politics, European politics, etc. It's authoritarian seeking to replace the democracies of the world with their own management of world affairs. That's how big this game is. It is utterly conscious and an amoral project. I'm all for stopping it, but how? Scrape yourself off the ceiling and think calmly and soberly about that. Morally outrageous rhetoric and actions are part of the movement. What is the machinery underneath all this that manufactures the effects that has you foaming in moral indignation? What is the wrench that can be tossed into the machine to bust it up? What is a productive line of discourse on the matter? I don't know, other than to say, well, the EU regulating and the UK regulating against these problematic social media platforms is probably a start, and we're going to come on to that in a second. But just as another example of this, we've got Kikel and the FPO in Austria. We get into the 1930s. I mean, this is a potentially going to be a leader of Austria who is unashamedly like far right, and that's at the heart of the EU.
We're going to be looking this half at what.
Oh no, this is Kikel over here.
Union in a very difficult situation.
Yeah.
Because they'd be reluctant to expel Austria, wouldn't they? The other thing, of course, that is unbelievably bad timing about this is if Kikel becomes Chancellor of Austria, at the moment at which Germany is going to the polls, this can give a new flush of confidence to the AfD, who are running a very similar set of policies and a very similar set of ideas.
Backed by Mr. Musk.
Backed by Mr. Musk, echoing Trump. And of course, what's happening all the time, and this is why it feels to me so much more dangerous than people acknowledge, why we are beginning to see now elements of the 20s and 30s coming through, is that they all give space to each other. There's this horrible phrase, the Overton window of what's kind of acceptable to say or think. They're shifting it. Suddenly, as we said before the break, Robert Jenrick is saying things that no
in the UK
Conservative cabinet minister under Theresa May or David Cameron would ever consider saying, becomes acceptable. And as that shifts, then you get more and more slightly dopey people, voters on the right, beginning to think, well, is it such a bad thing? And maybe we can just expel these people peacefully. We don't need to actually, round them up. And of course, people forget what's going on here, which is that the early ideologues for the war in the Balkans initially talked about peaceful separation between Bosnians and Serbs. Not very long ago, in Europe, during our working lives, that Eichmann was working for Hitler to peaceably resettle Jews out of Austria. The idea initially was not to kill them. The idea was just to push them out, I think, to Madagascar initially. The fact that people are not processing that liberalism isn't just, and this is another thing I want to rant at you about. There's been a flurry of articles in Unheard from Trevor Phillips, for example, writing this, articles in the Times saying liberalism's dead, the centre's dead, the energy's now on the right. But liberalism isn't just Alistair and Rory with sort of mushy ideas and being too optimistic about Kamala Harris. It is moral. It's the idea that humans are equal in dignity, and the lesson of the Second World War, which is that if you give up on the idea that humans are equal and you start saying there are better people, white Austrians, and less good people, Muslim Austrians, so many things follow from that. The collapse of your democracy and ultimately war.
Yeah.
And this is what we're talking about with regard to nativism. This is that nativism part of the far-right radical populist movement.
Well, the other thing to put into that, which I think relates to a lot of what we've seen happening in America, is that I would argue that the rule of law is an essential part of the liberal order, but that was kind of universally accepted across right and left and centre, rule of law. But rule of law does not carry the weight that it did. The fact that we saw this week the peaceful acceptance of the presidential election result and that people arriving at Congress and taking their place and being sworn in and so forth, and contrast that with what happened 4 years ago, that means that those people that pursued what I would argue was an offence against the rule of law and democratic institutions, they've won again. That undermines the liberal order that we're talking about. By the way, though, Rory, I think although...
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. And then it's not just that, but it's these billionaire oligarchs that are coming in and saying, we want to bend the rule of law, or we want to shut down any investigations into us. Mark Zuckerberg is the most recent example.
What Silicon Valley is doing to try and curry favor with Donald Trump, and in particular Mark Zuckerberg, because this week Mark Zuckerberg announced that Meta is going to end its fact-checking programs across all of its social media sites. It was a program that was launched after the 2016 election, when Facebook had come under fire for allowing misinformation to spread unchecked. After the 2020 election, Donald Trump's own Facebook account was shut down because of the riots of January the 6th. If you haven't heard our series on January the 6th and what happened there, it's a fantastic look at how we got to January the 6th and what the significance of January the 6th is for America. Quick plug. But Mark Zuckerberg is basically rowing back from having said that he's very worried about misinformation, that he wants to help protect democracy. He's kind of gone full libertarian, doesn't want to be in the business of policing content anymore on his platforms, and has also appointed 2 more Republicans to prominent positions. He's got somebody in charge of global affairs who is a Republican, and he's put an ally of Donald Trump's on the board of Meta. So he's made these moves this week, which are a very clear political sign that he sees which way the political wind is blowing, and he's trying to do what he can to catch up, I think, with Elon Musk, who has got so close to Donald Trump that all of the other big social media and Silicon Valley titans, billionaires, are wondering what they can do to be second, third, fourth in line in Donald Trump's favors after Elon Musk. And I think the impact, even as Mark Zuckerberg himself has said, is that there will be more bad stuff online, on Meta, on Facebook in particular. They won't catch everything because it's now going to be left to these community notes, to basically the users of these social platforms to try and catch stuff that is a conspiracy theory, that is inciting hate, or that could be leading to hateful actions against people. A member of the board which oversees Meta has said she's very worried. Actually, she's a former Danish prime minister. Perhaps that's a bit of a coincidence. She's very worried about what this could lead to in terms of hate actions, not just hate speech against some minority groups, but hate actions against minority groups. So there's kind of a lot of concern about it, but I think we are in peak Silicon Valley cozies up to Washington moment. Having for years Silicon Valley kind of operated as a separate entity on the other side of the country, we now have a full embrace of the new administration by all of those tech titans. Fair enough, fair to say, Anthony?
No. And yeah, absolutely. And on the one hand, it's about generating more power by affecting policy and stopping investigations. And on the other hand, it might, for a very few number of these people, I'm not saying necessarily Mark Zuckerberg, but someone like Peter Thiel, it might actually be some kind of ideological thing as well. So Mehdi Hassan says, to understand how cynical Zuckerberg is, he's accused. So Mark Zuckerberg then went on Joe Rogan, typically, and then slagged off Joe Biden instead of slagging off who? Trump, who had threatened him with imprisonment, right? So to understand how cynical Mark Zuckerberg, he's accused Biden of targeting Meta for political reasons, which he knows is exactly what Trump has publicly done previously, right? And Trump, by the way, at a recent press conference was asked, do you think Mark Zuckerberg has changed his tack because of your threats on him? And Trump said probably yes. So Trump threatened to imprison Zuckerberg, says Hassan, but he goes on Rogan to complain about Biden and not Trump to his new MAGA fans. So it looks like Meta is going down the same route as X for sure. The turn at the end here from Zuck is everything. Look at what he's doing after building MAGA trust. He wants you to think Lena Khan came after Facebook over COVID posts. He's playing you. Someone else says the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is investigating Facebook and Meta because Facebook potentially misused consumers' financial information for advertisements. Zuckerberg, who wore a $900,000 watch on a recent announcement video, which not here and that another video, is using Joe Rogan to lie to consumers. On Rogan, Zuckerberg says he doesn't know what the CFPB is or why it's investigating Meta. The truth is, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau defends people from corporate abuse. Meta has been accused of illegally using people's financial data in its ad business. So he's then given $1 million to Trump. He's then cozying up to Trump. He's been to Mar-a-Lago. That you will get the investigations stopped into Meta, investigation being stopped into the SEC and others, into Musk. Musk is using his megaphone to affect the world, and we've got this growing populism that is allowed to blossom because fact-checking's been taken away and because the algorithms promote fear and promote disinformation over truth and facts. This is where we're at in the world now. Mark's new friends, Zuckerberg, is now openly engaging with dishonest MAGA personality Benny Johnson. You know, a guy that took money from Russia through Tenet Media for spreading Russian disinformation. That's who Mark Zuckerberg is now hanging out with, Benny Johnson, on Instagram. Their blossoming relationship comes as extremist Charlie Kirk boasts that he recently met with Zuckerberg and looks forward to developing the relationship. Is going into that same ecosystem. Fabian Hoffman here says, I dislike some of the EU's regulatory overreach as much as anyone, but if Trump steps in to back Musk and Zuckerberg on this, I'll wholeheartedly side with the EU bureaucrats, no matter the personal cost, be it in terms of convenience or standard of living. So Jan Werner Müller here saying, oligarchs have the freedom to voice opinions on other countries. The EU does not have the freedom not to enforce its rules. Zuckerberg urges Trump to stop the EU from fining US tech companies. Comparing the bloc's antitrust penalties to tariffs, the Meta boss argued that Brussels is screwing with American industry. See what's going on here? They're just developing more and more power, and what can we do about it? The question that was asked me earlier, well, I'd say EU regulation, which is precisely why they're aiming for EU regulation, these guys. So Shashank Joshi says, the problem is, breaking. The US government, under incoming President Donald Trump, should intervene to stop the EU from fining American tech companies for breaching antitrust rules and other violations, Meta chief Mark Zuckerberg said late on Friday. Shashank Joshi from The Economist says, the problem is that when you threaten tariffs over everything, seizing Greenland, coercing EU regulators over social media and changing balance of trade, you don't really give your targets much incentive to comply with anyone. Meta just handed Russia the keys to your newsfeed, warns StopFake co-founder. So they're a disinformation organization from Ukraine, saying Meta is now in the hands of the Russians. Now Russian AI farms create perfect fakes, and Meta's removing fact checkers who spot them, as they've ended fact checking. This is only going to help the Russians and those who are using disinformation. And, you know, these people are lobbying government, as all big corporations do, for sure. But as Tom Fernby says, I just found out this week the UK has paid Tesla £200 million in grants over the past 9 years. Literally, if you hear how little pensioners get, childcare and cuts made by the Tories for decades, Elon, only famous for how much he exploits people, causing chaos in our political affairs, criticising everything about us, and we have paid him more than our PM makes in a lifetime working. For what? A self-driving car that will never pass the requirements to be safe enough to use? Absolutely shameful. I couldn't believe it. We literally paid for his last 8 private mansions. Not to wonder where there's a black hole in our finances, which taxes have to cover. It's all been going to Elon. Well, actually, there's some truth in this. So Elon Musk Tesla has lobbied, this was 3 years ago, lobbied the UK to raise tax on petrol and diesel. So lobbying on that, which has happened, and actually I would argue is the right thing to do. But Musk is lobbying, Tesla is lobbying the UK. And then Tesla's received almost £200 million in UK grants since 2016. Absolutely incredible there. So, you know, there's a lot of money going that way, and then he is daring to slag off the country, you know, bite the hand that feeds him. So I do worry about the state of public discourse, the state of social media, the state of disinformation versus information. I worry about the rise of the populist far right, and I think is all happening in concert with the takeover of our both, I think, mainstream and social media sites. You know, we are seeing the death of mainstream media because people are more likely to go to social media to get their news, but that means they're so much more vulnerable to being manipulated that you get a polarization of these people. And unfortunately, like we saw in the election, Harris versus Trump, fear sells more than joy. Harris campaigned on joy, Trump on fear. Inflation's going to get you. Prices are too high. Immigrants are doing this. Fear, fear, fear. And actually, we know Daily Mail will tell you fear sells. And in terms of social media, where disinformation travels 6 times faster than truth, and where fear sells more than joy, you have all the perfect ingredients for the rise of the populist far right, because they also ride on the waves of fear and otherization and blaming, those others. It's us and them. And that's where we're at. And I can't see it getting any better. It is pretty depressing. And John Oliver's got a really interesting comment here, but I probably don't have time. I'll leave that up on the screen. You can read John's comment on Elon Musk there. But I think we need to watch out for the social media companies and the people who run them. I think we have to. I've been saying for some time, actually, I really do think the EU is one of the only beacons of democracy, and there are problems with the EU, right? It's far from perfect. And there are nations within the EU who are clearly democratically backsliding. But you talk about any other organization or country around the world who are baked into, like, exceeding or existing to them, or existing in and of itself. You tell me one other organization, national government, who is fighting for transparency in a way that is baked into the EU. Like, in order to get into the EU, Ukraine has to become far more transparent, far more democratic, have far more independent media that's able to criticize, has to get rid of corruption, etc., etc., etc. You tell me how that is baked into any other system in the world. And so, like, the EU is coming under attack from everyone, and I think that is to the unfortunately to the benefit of authoritarianism around the world. And it isn't a video about Yahoo, woohoo, EU or anything. This is a video about democracy and about threats to democracy, and how social media is being used as a tool to I think, mobilize the populist far right and authoritarianism, and to degrade democracy around the world. And we are at an inflection point, and it's very, very worrying. Anyway, we started off with, randomly, California wildfires and the political weaponization of things that shouldn't be weaponized, but how that is a way of harnessing disinformation to bring down opposition leaders. And this is a way of Trump, utilizing social media to denigrate Gavin Newsom and Joe Biden here. And then we talked about how Joe Biden has got stats that should see him as really a very popular leader, but he's not, because I think he has, social media is being weaponized against Joe Biden, that Trump has done a much better job of selling his narrative and messaging. And if I was a Labour government in the UK right now, I would be concentrating all the time at the moment on how to message, on how to utilize social media to make sure that your message gets through. You cannot rely anymore on just delivering and claiming, we delivered this. Biden has delivered an economy, and yet that doesn't matter for crap, because what matters is people's perception of the economy. And if people think the economy has been bad and inflation has been bad and it's Biden's fault, then that's all that matters. Perception is reality. So if you're a government that's in power, you need to fight super damn hard to make sure that you can get your messaging out there, that people know you need to be selling your successes all the time, because you are always fighting against disinformation and perception manipulation. And it is super worrying when the richest people in the world are those at the forefront, the most powerful people in the world are at the forefront of disinforming us. Take care, speak soon.